Okay, good day, everyone. Whether it's morning for you, good afternoon, or it's a great night, just want to welcome you to our fourth installation in our VUS Voices webinar series. I'm really happy for the turnout thus far, and I know that there are likely to be others who will be joining. And so we just wanted to give them a moment to get here. And so the moment has passed, and we're now going to begin officially. I want to just say a warm welcome again to everyone, whether you are, this is the start of your day or the end of your day or the middle. Just want to express appreciation for being here. But more than ever, we want to be um, just express thanks and appreciation to Dr. George, who will be the person presenting at VUS Voices 4. And Dr. George will be presenting on a topic that is relevant to all of us. It doesn't matter where in the world you are, as long as you're an educator and you work with students. I know that there are two concerns that you will have for students numeracy as well as students literacy, because those are like the foundational blocks of students' educational development. And so this morning for us, just want to welcome Dr. George, who will be presenting on strengthening mathematics education in the Eastern Caribbean, lessons from St. Lucia. Along with Dr. George, you will have me as the chair, facilitating the conversation between yourself and Dr. George, as well as I'm Schontal Moore. And you also have Dr. Lisa Tomlinson, who is also a co-chair who will also, engage and encourage a conversation with Dr. George and us as we continue with the webinar. So without any further ado, let me introduce Dr. George a little bit more to you so that you have a sense of where she's coming from. Dr. George is a senior lecturer in mathematics education at the University of the West Indies, the Mona campus that's in Kingston, Jamaica. And she's also the co-lead for the project Advancing Caribbean Teachers in Mathematics. And we have an acronym for it as ACT in Math or ACT in Mathematics. All right, Dr. George, she coordinates the graduate and the undergraduate mathematics programs at the University of the West Indies, and she has over 25 years of combined experience as teacher, researcher, educational leader, consultant, and she's also been involved in many other kinds of activities across the world, not just with the Acting Math project, but she has also worked with the UK Commonwealth Scholarship and other projects in Jamaica, such as the Written Numbers in Everyday Life and others. And so she's really a champion for mathematics and the teaching of math and being culturally innovative in the teaching of math. And she's committed to making mathematics just generally as accessible and meaningful to learners and to those educators who are in the classrooms every day in front of students, trying to get them to appreciate and enjoy mathematics. So we're going to hear from Dr. George now about her experience of the project, and her presentation is Strengthening Mathematics Education in the Eastern Caribbean, Lessons from the countries in the Eastern Caribbean. Over to you, Lois. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. Thank you for this introduction. And good morning, afternoon, perhaps it is evening to you, everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be here today, engaging in what I consider, and many of you, I would imagine, this important conversation. This important conversation is a conversation back and forth on strengthening math education, lessons from the Eastern Caribbean. And before I dive into this presentation, let me just share a brief reflection. Growing up in the Commonwealth of Dominica, which is in the Eastern Caribbean, my early encounters with mathematics were shaped by dedicated teachers, and they worked tirelessly despite the limited resources. And as I progressed from being a classroom teacher to HOD to principal, locally, then in the region, in curriculum development, and then with CXC, I saw firsthand the struggles that children, teachers, other people had with math, but I also saw the triumph, not only in Dominica, but across the wider region. And for me, one defining moment was when I worked with the first, I think, OECS harmonized curriculum, and I will explain what OECS means. This was really a testament to the power of regional collaboration in shaping education. And that experience, for me, it underscored a truth that resonates across many of our small and developing nations. The challenges in math education are not isolated, but they are shared. And so the solutions must also be collective. And this is why initiatives like the Advancing Caribbean Teachers Act in Mathematics are so critical, not just for the Caribbean, but for many Commonwealth countries who are facing similar constraints in teacher training, student engagement, resource availability. So this is an opportunity for us to rethink, reimagine how we prepare teachers, how we engage our students, how we use data, technology, and culturally relevant approaches to strengthen math. So today, my aim is to share key insights, lessons learned, and recommendations from this project, which I believe have broader relevance beyond the Caribbean for varied educational systems. And my hope is that these reflections contribute to ongoing discussions on math education reform, professional development, and the use of innovative strategies across the Commonwealth. Let us begin. For context, especially for those listening who are not familiar or very familiar with the Caribbean region, the Eastern Caribbean is located in the east of a region, and it is a block of countries. It consists of member states, full and associate, etc., which is not my job today. But just so that you understand that it is a block that is organized under the OECS, or the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, and we share many commonalities, although there are unique national differences. So in terms of similarities, we have a common past. We inherited a British structure in terms of education, where we typically start with preschool, followed by the primary level, secondary, and the tertiary. We have common exam frameworks and examinations. For example, at the end of primary school, some countries use, and their kids, they sit the CPEA, which is the Caribbean Primary Exam Exit Assessment. And at the end of secondary school, all Caribbean nations, at least from the Eastern Caribbean, the students sit the CSEC examinations, which would be the Caribbean Secondary Education Certificate. In terms of the funding for education, public education is generally free, and it is compulsory up to the point of high school. So governments, therefore, are spending quite a bit on education in the Caribbean. And we have a focus on literacy and numeracy. At the primary level, we have core subjects like math and English language, science, in some islands, social studies, and there's an increased emphasis on STEM education. There is regional collaboration, and the OECS states, OECS, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, they benefit from joint policy initiatives like the harmonized curriculum and shared educational resources, as well as teacher training programs. There's some key differences as well. Variations in curriculum implementation in terms of the pacing and the mode of curriculum delivery. Resource allocation also varies. So you have some jurisdictions like St. Lucia, St. Kitts, they spend quite a bit of their GDP on education. And, there would be implications for that level of spending. In terms of teacher professional development, some countries have more structured systems and certification pathways through their teachers training institutions, while some rely on more external training programs, often offered by the larger islands like Barbados and Jamaica, Trinidad, etc. And finally, in terms of our digital learning integration, we have countries like St. Kitts and Grenada who have made significant strides in e-learning adoption, and many others as well, but there are some which they are still in the early stages of adoption. Looking at math education in the Caribbean in particular, our system, as I said, begins usually at preschool, but preschool is not compulsory in many of our EC countries. However, from 3 years to 16 years of age, children in these schools, in this system, would engage in math. So you are looking at about 13 years of math engagement. One of the things we do find, and my research has shown that over the time children are engaged in mathematics, there is a steady decline in many of their, in terms of their achievement, in terms of their engagement, in terms of their attitude. There is a progressive widening of the gap in terms of their competencies, and that is of particular concern because at the end of high school, this is the portrait that we have, that many of our kids, after spending almost 13 years in mathematics classrooms, we have approximately 39% of students passing mathematics. And this particular portrait, I have presented the last 4 years, but it is the portrait of decades showing underperformance of children in mathematics. And this is a dismal picture, and one that has been labeled as a regional crisis. Not only do we see the performance being weak in terms of the children who sit mathematics, a significant number of students do not even reach the stage of sitting the math exams. And as we saw from the previous slide, the majority who do, they fail to achieve a passing grade. And this widespread underperformance limits individual opportunities for higher education and employment. And something that is not often talked about is that it reinforces cycles of poverty and inequity, and also inequality across systems. At the national level, when you think about it, the shortage of skilled math professionals, it's problematic because it weakens our economic growth, innovation, global competitiveness, and very importantly, it threatens long-term development and sustainability. So addressing this issue is not only urgent, it is of top priority and should be of top priority to our nations. You are in a webinar talking about math, so you may be convinced that math matters and success in math is important. But I do have to underscore that math is crucial, not just from an individual perspective, but from a national perspective. And that is one of the reasons why the underperformance is so problematic. We know that individuals with strong math competencies, they have enhanced problem-solving skills, critical thinking, decision-making capabilities, and it opens doors. It is a gatekeeper to higher education and career opportunities in diverse fields, including STEM education. And for countries who have mathematically proficient populations, that serves to drive innovation. As I said before, competitiveness in a technologically driven world. And the list can go on and on. And it is for this reason, to address the crisis that I've just outlined in the region, that the Advancing Caribbean Teachers Acting Mathematics project was conceptualized by Dr. Schontal Moore, an advisor with the Virtual University for Small States of the Commonwealth, VUSSC, and Commonwealth of Learning. And addressing any complex global challenge requires strong multi-sectoral partnerships. As Dr. Moore mentioned, the issue that we have in the region with less than stellar math performance is something that across the world, internationally, uh, education systems are continuing to grapple with. And this is a complex problem because it involves many stakeholders. And therefore, the Act in Math is a project that embodies a collaborative approach. So it has brought together Commonwealth of Learning, VUSSC, Commonwealth of Learning, but also Ministries of Education. And in this iteration of the project, 3 such islands. We have St. Kitts and Nevis, and we can see their logos on our this really beautiful depiction that we have created for the project, or that was created for the project. St. Kitts and Nevis, as I said, St. Lucia, and the St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And yours truly, I have come on board as an expert in math education within the region. And the goal of this initiative really is to strengthen math teaching and learning. We want to equip our teachers with, not just teachers, educational stakeholders, let me broaden that a little bit, with competencies so that we can ultimately see some academic success and, big goal, ultimately national development. So the aims of the project, twofold. One, to improve teachers' mathematics knowledge for teaching, and we aim to do this through technology-enabled approaches as well as gender-responsive norms. We know within the region, there's this discussion in terms of the performance of our boys and girls and that differential, and therefore this project is also addressing that. And finally, to cultivate a community of practice whereby our teachers gain knowledge in utilizing culturally relevant methods. So who are the people participating in this project? We have approximately 85 of our educational stakeholders across 3 of our islands, as I said, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I must say a huge thank you to the participants, because there is no project without participants, and without participants engaging as they have been. And as I talk about the project, you will see why we are so grateful for the participants, because so much is expected of them. So who are the educational stakeholders participating? Teachers across primary level grades K to 6. We have principals, numeracy coaches, education officers, curriculum officers, and teacher educators. So we have a wide cross-section of our education ecosystem. And the project has a particular model. And this is a model that we thought about very carefully. And I will outline some of the features of the project and the model in particular, a few slides to come. First of all, we had in January a face-to-face workshop where the teachers, education officers, etc., we engaged with a particular topic. And this has been followed by our virtual phase, our phase 2, which we are currently in, which comprises the Zoom sessions every month, and then an ongoing community of practice, which we consider to be a vibrant community of practice. And, the Zoom session is face-to-face, synchronous, and it is a gentle introduction to the virtual space where the participants are largely on their own, engaging with tasks and different activities that have been posted for them. And they can do so at their leisure when they have the time, or when they have dedicated the time to do so. So we see almost like a gradated approach, face-to-face, Zoom, synchronous, but virtual, and then fully virtual, just so that you get a flavor of what the workshop was about. We have some photos, but the aim was to facilitate conceptual development and just to enhance mathematical knowledge in fractional topics. And internationally and in the region, fractions is one of the most difficult subtopics in the math curriculum for teachers to teach and students to learn. And not only would I know this from the literature and my own experience in my research, the interviews that were done before the project began to get a feel from our educational stakeholders as to what they perceive the issue of math performance and the problems with math education in their territories, the topic of fraction came up over and over again. And therefore, in this workshop, we engaged for 2 days with hands-on activities, case studies, practical-based activities, manipulators, both virtual and physical. And 2 things I just want to mention to you that we have adopted for our engagement. And this adoption would go across both phases, both face-to-face and virtual. Think like a child. This was something that I have used for years in my practice. And then Dr. Porter from St. Vincent and Grenadines, she added to teach a child. So we have really thought about this particular slogan, you can call it what you will, because often we see mathematics being taught in a very abstract way, and abstract, aka adult way, not necessarily thinking about how children grow in their mathematical understanding. And so throughout our engagement, we are trying to come down, not in a negative way, but come down to the level of the child's thinking. How would a child see this? Often when we teach mathematics, this is the first time a child would, experience and engage with a particular topic. And for them, it is a series of confusing things, confusing symbols, confusing words. How do we put everything together so that it becomes a cohesive whole? The second thing that we very thoughtfully engaged in is this notion of safe space. And one of the reasons the face-to-face engagement was so important to build that level of collegiality and collaboration. But not just that. When you engage in mathematics, whether you're a learner or you're a teacher, it is filled with error-filled moments, gaps in understanding. And as teachers, because we are supposed to be the bastions of knowledge, sometimes we are afraid to say we don't know or we are unclear, etc. And one of the things we intentionally did was to brand the space a safe space. There's nothing you can't ask. If you don't know, that's fine. That's why we are here. And that was one of the features of our face-to-face engagement. Our Zoom sessions began last month with our orientation session. And in that session, we had, our participants engaging in a range of technologically, based activities, including the affective dimension as well. This is one of the things that I research, and it is really important to think about the affective dimension of mathematics, the anxiety aspect, the fear aspect, the attitudinal aspects, because these things, they impact the cognitive aspect. So we did different activities. So in terms of the features of the model, we have 5 main features. So we have used a blended approach. And we are combining the benefits of in-person interaction with the flexibility of online learning. As I said, we have this gradated kind of approach when we're full face-to-face. Then with the Zoom, it gives us that same interaction, but not physically together, but we are together. We can see each other, we can talk, and then we have our community of practice. And this provides a structured guidance, I would say, at the start of the project, and to really ensure foundation for subsequent online engagement. It also ensures support and collaboration beyond the traditional one-off workshops that our education systems are known for. one of the things we have asked our participants, teachers, numeracy coaches, etc., to do is to apply the strategies directly in their work, whether it's in the classroom of the kids or with teachers, to be able to get continuous feedback, to just learn about something from a theoretical perspective from a distance and not try it out. Because one of the things I say, our classroom should be, labs where we experiment, not to the detriment of our children, but so that we can learn more about how our children learn. So this project encourages active experimentation, but not only the experimenting, reflecting on what is done. And that leads, we hope, or is leading to practical and lasting improvements in teaching. And that iterative going back and forth, trying, reflecting, discussing, trying, reflecting, it results in what is called a thickened understanding. And that's a theoretical notion I won't go into in big detail. But as you continue that engagement, there's a thickening of the understanding that you have from different perspectives. Think of a prism. You can see things from different dimensions. It's the same prism, same entity that you're dealing with, but there are multiple perspectives. The structure is a 6-month duration structure. So this is really designed to provide long-term engagement for our participants and a deeper learning. And we are hoping that it would allow for progressive development, because development doesn't take place in a one-shot way. It is over time. And the implementation of strategies and reflecting will facilitate that. And this 6-month approach, we are hoping that it addresses the limitation of our general one-day workshops that, is ubiquitous in our education system. I have spoken about the collaborative multi-stakeholder approach already from the perspective of VUSSC, Commonwealth of Learning, and our ministries, but we also have the community of practice, which promotes peer learning and sharing best practices across the region, because I'm not the only expert in the room. We are learning from each other. We are gaining insights from each other, and the partnership aspect is important. Finally, a key feature is that the approach we have adopted, it's data-driven. As I said before we started the project, we had extensive interviews with stakeholders, from the chief education officer, education officers related for math and assessment. We spoke to parents, we spoke to principals, we spoke to children, and I say children are important stakeholders that often we do not include in our discussion of math performance. We hear, other people. So we spoke to children in terms of their own experiences with mathematics to gain some sort of portrait. Because even though I have lived and worked in the Eastern Caribbean for most of my working life, and even though I have understanding of, math education, research, etc., it is important to hear people's personal individualistic experience. And so for each island, we took the time to speak to these different groups of persons. And not only did we use data then to drive the shaping of this model and the project ongoingly, the participants engage in quizzes and they have to do journal entries, and we are using the Moodle learning analytics and surveys and interviews, because it is an ongoing refinement. We didn't sit and say this is what the project is going to be. No, the project is malleable in that it is being shaped by what the needs are, and that is a key feature that should really be a central part of what professional development is about. So the project model, the strengths, I spoke about this already. Unlike, one-time training sessions, this model, it really encourages sustained engagement. And I will talk about the challenges associated with that. It supports implementation, where the teachers are engaged in trying out things and talking to each other and speaking to us and discussing what were the challenges, what were the triumphs, etc. It involves active learning. Development is not a passive thing. It's not a passive participation, which often it has been in short-term sessions. So there's no accountability for what, let's say, educational stakeholders, you go to a workshop. What's the accountability for what you should have gotten out of that workshop? And as I said before, our countries are spending a lion's share of their budgets on education. And as we see globally, there is an increased call for accountability. I think even for the Caribbean region, the citizens will start asking, what are you doing with the money that we have been putting into education if after 13 years of engagement in a subject, more than half of the students fail? And if you were to run the statistics, it would be about less than 30% because many students do not even get to sit mathematics. So we are hoping this model continues to, be some sort of catalyst where we are looking at things and increasing retention and impact. We can't keep spending money with no impact. We can't keep doing things with no impact. And of course, the key question that comes up over and over, yes, this model has worked with 3 countries, but is it a scalable model? Is it a replicable framework for other Caribbean nations and Commonwealth countries to adopt and expand? And we are hoping that this will prove to be the case. This project is ongoing, so the lessons are being learned and we are learning as well. And we are seeing lessons from multiple levels, such as policy, the classroom, institutional and national development wise. And if there's time, I can talk about that a little bit. But even though we are still engaged, the project is providing some early evidence-based insights that can inform, we think, educational policies on mathematics teaching and teacher professional development. As I said before, we can't keep doing the same thing. That's not working. And expect a different result. So there seems like it seems to be inevitable that the Ministries of Education may want to enhance their teacher training policies, integrating longer-term hybrid professional development models instead of short isolated workshops. And the question is, how does this work? And we are hoping to provide some sort of model as to how it could work in different jurisdictions. And there's also potential for curriculum refinement. And that is to allow for greater alignment between pedagogical approaches and our students' needs. We don't have enough research in the Caribbean in terms of teaching and learning in general and in mathematics in particular. That's one I know for sure. And we are hoping that as we engage in this, we will get some more data. In terms of transforming the classroom, in terms of its practices and our teacher development. Let's be real, especially at the primary level. Our teachers are generalists, mostly, and they have to teach math. And if you would ask them, it's not because they want to teach math, they have to teach math. The data that we are seeing is that, many teachers do not have strong competencies in terms of initial qualifications in mathematics. Many of them are afraid. They lack the confidence, not because they don't want to necessarily, but sometimes they just don't understand. And we are hoping that teachers report increased confidence. And we have started to hear conversations of that. I just read in the Moodle last night, actually, when a teacher was just talking about implementing the use of fraction tiles in her class. And she said before, when she taught grades 5 and 6, the kids were not understanding the movement from the concrete to the abstract. And when she did it this time, she saw a movement, and that was great. I could hear even in her writing, and I say it, hear in her writing that, she was excited and I was excited as well. So improving confidence, improving problem solving abilities, improving the ability to teach for conceptual understanding. We still do a lot of procedural teaching and learning. And we know that this must be underpinned by people understanding the why you do of the what that you do. And we want to continue to see a greater emphasis on real world applications of mathematics. And we are seeing that, our stakeholders are seeing not just the what, the why, but the where. Where can we do this? And we're going to continue to do this. Next Wednesday, we are looking at reasoning in the mathematics classroom. And in doing so, we want to use culturally responsive teaching. We really want to meet students at the point of their need. And the blended model, it provides that sustained support. And we hope that it is not too burdensome. Like if you were doing a course where you have to go every week or twice a week, etc. But over 6 months, teachers can engage, for example, in the community of practice based on their particular situations. And finally, student learning and engagement. I just gave an example. We want to see our students be more excited, enjoy mathematics a bit more, and to see a reduction in anxiety. That's, as I said, affective dimensions. That's something I research, in particular math anxiety and math attitudes. And it is important that we address those elephants in the room. So we have quite a bit of work to do, And I'm just reiterating some of the lessons that we are seeing. Lessons, because as we are speaking based on what we are seeing the potentials that we spoke about, the transforming of the classrooms, student engagement. You see this boy's face where, that it's a joy to be in the classroom. That is our hope. But of course, there are challenges. Teachers are busy people, not just busy work-wise, but busy with life. And therefore, to engage in such a deep way can be difficult for them. And we are seeing, a reduction in the engagement in the community of practice, even though there are tasks, and the tasks, we have given liberal timeframes, but we have seen a reduction. So that's something we are looking at to see how we can work on that. And, change is not something that people in general, we're not just talking about education in particular, embrace, so it's easy. One of the things that is clear internationally is that teachers will continue to teach in a particular way, even if they're convinced that it is not the best way, even if they know they could try something else. Teachers teach very often how they were taught. And you find over their tenure, there is not much deviation in their approaches. So if lecture is the approach, that is the approach, no matter what workshop you go to, no matter what they engage in. And we are hoping that we can, face these types of barriers to understand why. Okay, we have talked about, for example, physical manipulatives, virtual manipulatives. Why then don't you try to use it? What's going on? How can we help? And for the model itself, beyond the participants, it's a demanding approach. Trying to use a data-driven approach is really a significant effort that should have dedicated full-time personnel for effective implementation. So if you're listening to this as a leader in education somewhere, that is something, even if it's for a 3-year stint, not just somebody coming on for 2 months, etc. But if we want to see the needle shift, we have to really engage in a way that we have not before. And finally, just some recommendations for scaling impact. The Commonwealth has limited resources, the ministries have limited resources, our nations have limited resources. So we have to think, even beyond the project, and we are absolutely grateful for this collaboration. And one of the things that we are suggesting and recommending is the institutionalizing of the blended learning professional model for teachers at a national level, not just with 25 teachers in each country or 30 teachers in each island, but for in-service training. How can we create a model where we do some level of face-to-face, but we know face-to-face engagement is very expensive. But added to that, the benefits of the virtual engagement. And we want to continue to establish ongoing mentorship programs to maintain teacher support beyond the project timeline. Teachers need to be supported and they need people to talk to. So I'm trying something, I'm experimenting, but I'm doing it in my head and I don't have somebody to talk to. I don't have somebody to look at what I'm doing and say, I think you could do this differently. I think this was very good, etc. Mentorship is something that I think we don't talk about enough in education in general and mathematics in particular. And we want to expand this project to more Caribbean nations and ultimately other systems in the Commonwealth. We want to leverage lessons that we have learned to scale the project to other small states, or I would say more other developing states, and to customize training to address unique needs. And that's something we have done from the inception of the project. And this is a recommendation we continue to make. Training is not a one size fits all. It has to be customized to address unique challenges with different national educational systems. And it is important. And this is something that I'm very passionate about. We need to continue to conduct research, including longitudinal studies on student achievement and teacher effectiveness post the project. While the project is going on, everybody's excited and people do what they're supposed to do. But what are the gains? How do the gains continue? What do they look like post the project? And that's where universities, teachers, colleges, ministries, Paul, etc., can come in, because we have to do these studies and we have to continue to get the data and use the findings to refine national math education policies and curriculum frameworks. We often create frameworks, you come together in a room and each person gets a thing and you write on it. But where's the research to underpin what we are doing? We need to continue to strengthen that particular aspect. And that's where the collaboration is important. Institutions, higher education institutions, teacher training institutions. And we really want to encourage higher education institutions to integrate some of the project findings into teacher training programs. Not just because we're looking at in-service teachers, but how can pre-service teachers benefit from, the projects that we are engaging in? And we want to continue to foster regional collaboration to share the best practices across multiple education ministries. We often operate in silos, even if we are called OECS or CARICOM or Windward Islands, etc. And these are blocks within the Caribbean, blocks of different islands. Often we operate in a very siloed way. And finally, we need to continue to leverage technology for a wider reach, enhance our online learning resources, not just at the teacher level, but even at the school level, and at the teacher level to support continued teacher engagement. We want to develop an open access repository of Caribbean teaching resources tailored to Caribbean context. So in our community of practice, one of the things that we are doing is asking teachers to contribute to lesson plans, activities, games, etc., on different topics. So we would have this first, what we call bank or repository, that we could say, okay, this is a start, and make it available to whosoever will. And as I wrap up, what I will say is that, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a consultant, of the project, etc. The ACT in Mathematics project, it represents a transformative approach to teacher development. And I am convinced that we are laying the groundwork for sustained improvement in math education across the Caribbean if we continue what we are doing. And the time is now. The time is now, like act, it says act. Act is an action word. So we chose also the word of the project, in a very intentional way. The time is now to consolidate these gains, scale the impact, and really ensure that every student, not just students in urban areas, not just students from high SES, but every student has access to high quality math instruction. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for your attention. And again, Advancing Caribbean Teachers in Mathematics, thank you for listening. So over to our moderator or chairperson.
Thank you so very much, Lois. And I will just, be on a first name basis. Thank you for your presentation. Very exciting, illuminating, thought-provoking, and it has possibilities. As I listen to you, Lois, and I'm just going to open up the conversation now. Lisa and I will ask some direct questions, but the floor is open to all participants on this webinar. You can use the chat space to record your questions, or you could put your hand up and I could have you open up your mic and engage in the conversation. I am just before even going into the conversation, I want to say that I am really honored that so many persons from across the world are here. We have represented in this webinar persons from the Bahamas, and I'm going to call each country because you turned up, and it's important for us to recognize each country that's represented here. So the Bahamas, Rome, Belize, China, Lesotho, St. Lucia, India, the Maldives, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Kiribati, St. Kitts and Nevis, Malawi, Jamaica, Namibia, Tirana Island, South Africa, and I think I said St. Lucia. I did. Those are some of the persons represented here. There might be others, and I'm asking, and Canada, and I'm asking persons to please go ahead and just type your country within the chat space. All right. I want to start by saying, with my question, Lois, um, the Honorable Minister, Mr. Curtis King, Minister of Education from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, he was the first person who sparked the idea of the project. He was very concerned about mathematics teaching, and learning within St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and he wanted something to be done. And within the spirit of VUSSC, which is the acronym for the Virtual University for Small States of the Commonwealth, this initiative within the Commonwealth of learning is really about collaboration of the small states across the Commonwealth. Some of these small states have called a moment or two ago, but small states, they have particular challenges and issues, and they also have limited resources most of the time to, initiate whatever projects they would want to put in place. And so VUSSC is about bringing the small states together so that we can collaborate, we can strategize to ensure that we all benefit from the limited resources which really exist, right? And so that's why we have created this Acting Math project, not just for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where the idea generated from, but we extended it to other Caribbean islands, right? Starting with the smaller states in the Caribbean. And so the question that I want to get to is, having started with St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we want to just, acknowledge the support of the coordinator from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Miss Nicole Franklin, and from St. Kitts and Nevis, Miss Carol Bodie, and from St. Lucia, Miss Janella Gifford. With us starting there, how do you envisage this program rolling out? If you had to manage resources to actualize the objectives of ACT, how do you see it rolling out within the small states of the Caribbean and then even beyond the Caribbean? Is that possible? Talk some more about that, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Moore, Schontal.
That's fine.
Excellent question, because it goes back to the topic of scaling up and replication and replicability. So for me, I have thought about this a bit, and the train the trainers model is something that I think would be a good way to start. So having done the project, we would establish, I would think, specialists beyond me, because you want specialists beyond one person. You need a team to be the ones who really embrace the model, understand the model, and then roll out the model. So I am thinking we should have at least 3 iterations, because to do something once, yes, you gain insights, but you are not sure that these insights will hold again and again. So to answer your question, one, we need additional competencies, not just for the teachers per se, but for the trainer perspective. But we also need about 3 more iterations at the primary, at the secondary level, and perhaps, who knows, the tertiary level.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Lois. Lisa, over to you.
Thanks, Chantal. Thank you, Lois, for this presentation. I was very eye-opening. I learned a lot in terms of numeracy and math, in terms of its approach, because I always thought that math was in good shape, in the sense that even the way you were talking about it being abstract, I never saw math as abstract. I always thought it was this practical way of teaching. Leave that to the humanities. We're the abstract people. So it was an eye-opening to see that math is actually having these challenges. One of the questions I had was, you talked about culturally responsive teaching. And that was also something that stuck out to me, because when I think of math, I just see math as very universal. This is just how you teach it, 1, 2, 3, 1 times 1, etc. So I wanted you to just kind of speak to the ways in which, like, what does that look like within the Caribbean when you talk about culturally responsive teaching as it relates to math? We see it in other areas, but I'm curious to see what it looks like in the Caribbean.
Fantastic. That's an excellent question. And culturally responsive could have different dimensions. So for example, the questions that we give students, the context of those questions, even the objects that we use. So for example, I was looking at a curriculum last week, and this is a Caribbean-based curriculum, and all the examples were about apples and pears and grapes. And this is a curriculum document. And we are Caribbean people, where we have mangoes and we have other things. Yet we see that we are talking about all kinds of things that, yes, our students see on television. Yes, they have now especially high SES people. So starting with not just the content, because the content remains quite static. If you're dealing with number, measurement, etc., what do you measure? What do you engage in? The second thing I would say in terms of culturally relevant, we are doing a project, as Schontal mentioned earlier, as a collaboration between us in the Caribbean and Jamaica, called Written Numbers in Everyday Life. So my colleagues in England, when their 3 to 5 year olds are going around looking at mathematical things, there may be differences in what they see. And this is another example of culturally responsive teaching. What does mathematics around, let's say, a child living in a rural area in St. Lucia versus an urban area in St. Lucia, what would that look like? How would that be different? Thirdly, in terms of using our very innovative ways. So for example, we have, in St. Lucia, they may be able to understand, we call them caboose, or little toy trucks that we use, like on the road you'll be playing, or under the house, etc. Can we use that, for example, to explore geometrical concepts, as opposed to using all these different things that the kids have not experienced, they don't know anything about? Can we use, what is around us, what the kids know about in terms of engaging them in math? So that's just 3 ways. There are others, but I will stop here for now.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Lois.
nice. Lois, I want to go back to the CAP, you know, something that educators should be familiar with in terms of the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor as, strategies for teaching.
Mhm.
I want you to talk with me a little bit more in terms of the importance of those factoring into classroom pedagogy and in particular math teaching and learning.
So thank you for that question. We have a perfect example from the workshop where we put together cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. So for example, we dealt with fractional concepts. And because as part of the aim of the project is to use technologically enabled approaches, most people think technology means it has to be on the internet and it has to be any of those things. It was from you I learned about different levels of technology, high tech, low tech, all different types of tech. And therefore we engage with fraction tiles. And that was the psychomotor way, where the teachers were using the lens of children were exploring unit fractions and putting together fractions that were equivalent to each other, etc. So the teachers were touching and feeling and seeing, very importantly, that the amounts were the same. They were not just told that a half and 2/4 are the same, but we saw psychomotorly that they were the same. So the cognitive aspect was coming out in terms of conceptual understanding, in terms of pattern finding, in terms of forming generalizations, and understanding what does it mean to add fractions? What does it mean to find equivalencies? But even importantly, I consider it to be almost like a cross-cutting thing, is the emotions as you engage in those activities. First of all, how do you come to the activity? Is it fearful? Is it, I couldn't be bothered? Is it bored? Is it all of those things? And then we saw the excitement as the teachers, engaging in grade 3 to 6 level of work, but the excitement as they were seeing those different patterns coming out. You could feel it, and the country coordinators who were in the room felt it as well. So this is a perfect example how you bring together all 3, because for our young children, Schontal, it is critical that children engage in moving and manipulating and touching and seeing for themselves, not being told. Remember, our math education is quite a bit of teacher telling you what is, but we want our kids to experience for themselves whatever it is. So for example, if you're looking at cubes, if you're looking at squares, how can you experience that beyond being told that it has all sides being equal? So that's one of the ways that we, in a very real way, bridged the cognitive, and you were not at the workshop. So I'm sure you're starting to get the sense of excitement. The cognitive aspect is fundamental. So we have the concepts, we have the skills, but we also have the actual manipulations. And then we bridged over to the virtual manipulatives, which offers a wider access. And I will just say, finally, we have a lot of issues with resource availability. And this is one of the ways that the use of virtual things bridges that gap, because you can have one website for 30 children, each child can have access to that particular manipulative that you are using. And we also want to use real world things. It's not just, man-made things. How can we use things in our environment that embody the mathematics that we are talking about?
Thank you. There's a question in the chat that follows up from this one, where Valentine is asking, what tools are you specifically using to enhance student engagement in a hybrid classroom?
All right. So when we talk about students, are we talking about the participants involved in the project or in students in general? So for our project, in terms of the hybrid space has a particular definition. It does not mean that you are doing physical and virtual at the same time. Just to recap, we had the face-to-face engagement, we have the synchronous Zoom, and then we have the community of practice. So this is a really important question in terms of what are the tools that we are using. So, for example, for the project, we used in our Zoom session, as you saw, we used, for example, Padlet. We used the Zoom feature itself, and we used virtual manipulatives. So after having engaged with the physical things, which we now understood because we saw, we touched, we then moved in to looking at the same manipulative, but from a virtual perspective. And we found that to be important because I believe the tools should not just be mathematically based, but it should also be engagement based. So the use of games, like we are quite familiar now with Kahoot, and these types of games are important. Using Mentimeter, and there are free versions. Some people say these are really expensive, but there are some really good free versions, and all of the manipulatives that we in this project, we have exposed our participants to are open access manipulatives, open access resources. And I'm really excited, Schontal. On Wednesday, I'm going to introduce our participants to PhET. It's a simulation. Let me tell you, it's going to blow. It's a simulation of mathematics, and the University of Colorado, they have put an inordinate amount of time in putting that together. And now I'm in collaboration with some researchers, and they introduced me to this, and I said, oh my gosh, this is mind blowing. So next week, Wednesday, one of the things I want to introduce our participants, again, open access, because I said to them, we are in the developing world. We need things that, we're not going to spend money, and it is freely available and very powerful, and they're doing research on it. So I'm super excited, clearly.
All right, sounds good. Another question coming at you from Nelson, or even comment. Nelson is saying, excellent work that you're doing here in terms of, building math competence and so on. And he's celebrating expansion as a definite plus for the region. And so maybe, you could comment a little bit in terms of how will this impact the improvement of performance at CXE, because Nelson is heading in that direction when he says we need some improved CXE grades.
Okay. I'm going to be measured, because one of the things that we often don't understand about achievement is that it's a long game. So let me explain what I mean by long game. You have to input over time, consistently, to end up with a particular result in general. I have seen, for example, working with children, that it was almost immediate, the change from fail to success, but this is not always the case. And therefore, the project's focus is now at teachers, educational stakeholders, generally at the primary level. We need to continue work with this project at the secondary level. Very importantly, what I would say is fundamental. We need to close the gaps, close the learning gaps that we are seeing at the primary level. When a child does not understand the fundamentals on fractions, and the fractions, it underpins every other topic that they will see in the math curriculum up to the secondary school level, I don't have to explain what the impact of those gaps in critical knowledge would do. So one of my, it continues to be my fundamental recommendations. We have to assess early, intervene early with targeted interventions, and it doesn't have to be long. So that's where I see it, because as we start closing the gaps with teachers teaching in a particular way where the kids are understanding, when they get to high school, they have a strong foundation. Think about a house, a strong foundation. When hurricane comes, and we know hurricane is going to come in from June, will the foundation hold? Will the house hold? Or is it going to tumble? So we want to build our kids with strong foundations in math. So as they go through the system, they're able to build, because mathematics is like a house, you know. You are building on top of things compared to other subjects. Other subjects would be like a bungalow. Mathematics is a high rise. So what you build at the initial levels will support and sustain you as you go up to high school. So Nelson, thank you so much for that question. I probably gave you more than you wanted, but that is the path we are on, closing those gaps early through improved mathematics pedagogy.
There was another question about students' language and their understanding and perceptions of math when, you know, math is being taught via a second language or a third language. How does that impact appreciation for math and competence in math and perceptions around math?
I chuckle and I smile, Schontal, because last week I was in Mexico and I traveled through different parts, but one particular part that I traveled in, nobody spoke English. And as persons tried to communicate and I'm listening and I put, Google Translate on my phone and so on, I sat back and I said, is that what it feels like to sit in my maths classroom? Is that how our kids feel? Because math has its language of its own. And what I have found is that kids are sitting in math classes, supposedly, because we're speaking supposedly the same language, but teachers and students are speaking very different languages. And I felt frustrated. I felt demoralized as I could not understand and the Google Translate wasn't working. And I thought to myself, wow, how are learners? And we're talking about, I'm starting my response with just speaking, let's say your language is English. In St. Lucia and Dominica, you have Creole as well. So you have that also coming in. But in Belize, etc., you have the Mayan language and other, languages. How does that impact? This is not research that I have conducted myself. I have read that, of course, I think there would be ill effects of that. But just going back to the point I'm making, we need to ensure that we are speaking the same language when we're in a math class. That it's not that I'm speaking Greek and you are speaking English and there's no translator. Because if you think about it, that is what many of our math classes feel like for our students. It's not fun. It wasn't cool. I did not enjoy it. And I don't think our little ones would enjoy it either. I'm not sure I answered the question, but again, this is not an area I have studied extensively. So that's the comment I will make.
Thanks, Lois. That took me back to my own experience of math when you said it was not fun. It just gives you a headache. But you're making math so fun, even the way you mentioned the idea of pet, but that's another story. Shanine Campbell in the chat is asking, in Belize at the primary level, teachers have been trained in using the CPA, concrete pictorial abstract, Singapore approach for teaching mathematics with the implementation of, let me go down here, with the implementation of, oh, did I lose it? Oh dear. I think I went down too far. Uh, uh. So with the implementation of for some reason, my cursor is not with the implementation. Chantal, you want to help me out here? Because it's when I
Sure.
switch it, it goes, yeah, it
Technology
goes to
does
the
that.
next comment and it's
Yeah.
not finishing the sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Shanine is saying that with the implementation of a competency-based curriculum, teachers are also encouraged to use various manipulators to engage learners. Any feedback, comment on Shanine's note?
Thank you so much, Shanine, for this point, and love bellies, and you all are doing such important work in terms of how you're addressing the math needs. The language use is important, and I'm going to say something maybe controversial, but that's always exciting in a webinar. Teachers are encouraged to use. What does that mean? In teaching, I find there's a lot of autonomy, which is a good thing in some regard. But when teachers are encouraged to use, there is also the opening to not to use. So I see in a lot of classrooms, and I've spoken to several principals over the last month, that their cupboards are filled with things that have dust, resources with dust. Because I actually challenged a principal to go to a cupboard and look. And she said, you know what I found? And she sent me a picture. She said, oh my God, how did you know there were things in my cupboard? She's a new principal. And I said, I know there are things in your cupboard because projects come out like this one, schools are given things and teachers are encouraged to use. We need to go beyond being encouraged to use. And it's going to sound like strong language, but as a principal and an educational leader, we have to mandate that they use it. And we don't only mandate, but we ensure that they know how to do it well. Because one of the things, Shanine, that we saw in the workshops we did in January is that most teachers, every teacher was exposed to the CPA approach. But guess what they said to me? They said, I didn't realize that there were different dimensions of the CPA approach. I didn't realize I was not using it as effectively as I ought to. And look at this, several even experienced teachers, and it's not shade to the younger teachers, you understand what I mean, and people shade. I'm not being, non-positive here, but a lot of times when we say have been trained, one of the things I've emphasized even in this presentation is that we have to do several iterations of that training. A one-time training in the CPA approach is not sufficient for you to continually. So are the teachers using it? Who is supporting them? What's the mentorship associated with using those approaches? Because Shanine, guess what? Like many of us in this webinar, our teachers go to a workshop, they have been trained to use manipulatives, and don't forget we have 50 manipulatives, but they have been trained to use manipulatives, and we expect them to come back and perform magic. Sorry, this is not good.
Yes. All right, Lois. There are two questions or comments that can merge from Nicole as well as Omar. And they're talking about teachers' resistance to change, especially with, putting to sleep or putting aside antiquated pedagogy to move into using more progressive pedagogy. How do you inspire teachers to want to embrace change for more effective math teaching?
Excellent question. And because I have worn many hats in the education system, Schontal, I think I have a very unique perspective. I am not just a researcher and a consultant. I've been a principal, HOD, qualified teacher, unqualified teacher, run the gamut of what the education system looks like. And education leadership is critical. Principals who believe that it's important to use manipulatives, for example, support their teachers in using manipulatives. As I said, teaching can be a very autonomous thing. People do what they want. But as a school, as a nation, what is the ethos that we have adopted? Because when people are free to do whatever they want, they do what they're most comfortable with. And what they're most comfortable with is teaching how they were taught. And for somebody like me who, went very seamlessly through the math system and, lecture method worked for me and so on, I would say, why are them kids not getting it? Why are they not getting it? I got it when I went to school. And that's the attitude of a lot of people. I understood when I didn't have manipulatives and I did well. Why all this fuss about manipulatives now? So again, we need to approach the barrier from different perspectives. One, show that an alternative is possible and that it is effective. If somebody's telling you to try something that's going to take a whole lot of work and they're not convinced that it's going to work, they are not going to do it. That's basic psychology. The second thing, principals, leaders, etc. We have to decide whether it is a choice or whether it is something that we strongly suggest, or it becomes mandatory that we operate in a think like a child, to teach a child, for example. If we operate that, we are going to be using manipulatives, and the teachers develop their competencies in doing so. It is not going to happen overnight. So principals in the room, when you send your teachers to a workshop and they said, I've come back, I know how to use manipulatives, you have learned how to use maybe one manipulative partially. Iterations need to happen, and we have to give the time and space for that. Schontal, the education system, everybody's busy. Math is just one subject in a curriculum, in a system with maybe 10 subjects. So the question is, do we have space for math? Because now there's STEM and there's this and there's psychosocial and social emotional learning. And math is trying to carve out a big part, and rightly so. I will continue to be a champion. But I think, as I said before early in the presentation, it's a complex problem. It's not a simple problem, and we can't approach it simplistically with one, as I will keep saying it and sound like a broken record, one short trainings, development sessions, they do not work. Even when your teacher said to you, can we move on? We have been in the business long enough to know, no, we're not moving on. Let's do another iteration until we are sure we have gained mastery. And the final point I will say on the mastery business is the same way our kids are not getting to mastery, because that's how we teach. We teach fractions today, decimals tomorrow, percentages the day after. When do the kids get the time to consolidate their knowledge, to thicken their understanding? And the same thing is happening with our teachers. And I really commiserate, because it's not easy with that level of expectation. But as we continue to support them in their learning and growing, in their confronting of their own wall and barriers to practice, talking about it. Talk about the elephant in the room. How do you treat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. One bite at a time. I know I sound very much optimistic, etc. I'm still optimistic that we can eat that elephant, all of us in the Caribbean and in the Commonwealth, if we take one bite at a time. Not easy, but possible.
Thanks. Just one more comment from the chat, and then I'll ask Lisa, because with now 10 minutes to go to wrap up time. Tanisha was saying that the model of continuity with the community of practice is really essential to ensure quality performance in the math classroom. And I was going to also ask you to touch on what you envisage to come out of this community of practice part of the project, in terms of strengthening math teaching, lessons learned. Let's focus on that community of practice.
Tanisha, I suspect we are kindred spirits, because based on your comment, the importance of that continuity. I didn't give the statistics, but the research is clear, not just internationally, but in the region, at least for Jamaica for sure, I know, because we have the research. that at the end of an undergraduate program, that when you get your bachelor in education or your associate's degree in education, you are a novice. You have just started on the starting line. And therefore, the model of continuity of practice is essential. And from our community of practice, we are hoping that, as I said before, that we would get this repository of resources for some of the topics, that the teachers will contribute to the repository, and we will be able to, make it accessible. We are hoping that coming out of the community of practice, that smaller groups form to support each other, because even in the first activity, I'm seeing people sharing and just getting to know each other, and they have started to form their own bonds, because I saw grade 6 teachers coming together, and I saw lower school teachers coming together. What can we get out of this? Continued support, strengthening of the competencies. If I don't know something, let's normalize saying, I don't know. Let's not pretend that we know if we don't know. Let's normalize that this is difficult. We are all trying. Let's normalize experimentation. So I'm hoping to come out of the community of practice that teachers become, it's action research, whether you write it up or not, becomes what we do as our norm. The same way you come into your class, you write the date on the board, you say my objectives, guys, today we are going to be doing ... Let's normalize becoming experimenters, becoming, innovators in our classrooms. I am hoping, as I envision what will come out of the community of practice, to be all of these things and more.
Okay, thanks. Waynet and Natalie were concerned about the completion of a syllabus and also, just touching topics just for covering and running off. How do you balance to ensure you get the content covered as well as you pay attention to pedagogy? What advice would you give to teachers around that?
The good thing is I have thought very long and hard about these topics. So therefore, giving a response is something that I am quite enthusiastic to do. One of the things we don't do is spend enough time at the preschool and primary school for our kids to gain mastery of the prior learning that they will need in high school. I am currently in the field. I'm in schools now every week with teachers and students, and teachers have to be doing things that children should have learned in grade 4. And if we spend the time, and that is the problem, we are not spending the time to develop the students' competencies at the primary level, because we are so busy trying to get them ready for the CPEA. And the CPEA for the non-Caribbean people is the primary exit examination that is like a noose in our neck. What we need to do, because if you're at the high school level, if your kids come to you, because I've sat in a class this week where the kids, they have the content on lock, they're in grade 7 in Form 1. And I went to a same class, and the gaps are so big and wide. When they come to you in grade 7, knowing what they ought to know based on what the curriculum says, you fly. You do not spend time in high school having to go back over and over and reteach, which is what our math classes look like. A whole lot of reteaching, and then a small, time is spent on the actual lesson content. The strong recommendation, I know I'm repeating myself, but it is worth repeating. We need to assess early to see what the gaps are. We need to ensure that we intervene early. We need to teach for mastery at the primary level. We cannot keep teaching for the test. We have to teach for mastery, because you make all our lives easier as the kids progress through the education system. And those are the 3 recommendations. I will continue to sound like a broken record, because I know the issue about the loading curriculum is a thing. I know that. And every iteration of curriculum reform and curriculum redevelopment, the curriculum becomes more and more loaded. Can you imagine that? Every teacher has said, there's too much stuff. And guess what? The next iteration has more stuff. Who is listening? What are we doing? So again, just something to think about. Again, it is really, really important as we develop the competencies, and we have some really good examples coming out in the chat as well, to develop the competencies in the teaching and also listen to our stakeholders. You know, these are some recommendations, and I think ACT is actually addressing some of those, especially the competencies at the primary level.
Thanks. Lisa?
Oh, thanks again. I'm really enjoying the discussion. I'm still a mathophobia. I don't know how the project is addressing mathophobics. The question that I had was looking more at, you talked about the gender responsive strategic, and I know your focus is about improving math and interest in math. And I wanted to know more about how, even someone mentioned the language and we went to, I guess, second language, but I also wanted to know how, if you're seeing through this project, even though it's not a major focus, but that is one of the ways in which interest is built. How are you finding it in terms of the little girls? Like, are we still, is there still that barrier around girls not doing math? Is that still an issue where, you know, at the secondary level, even you mentioned about the students writing the exam. Are you still finding that even though there's a small amount, they're mostly boys? So is that being addressed? And if it's not a major thing, are you seeing any improvement around the area of gender or
Okay,
gender balance?
so I will give an initial background about gender and mathematics. The Caribbean is unique. We don't have the issues that many international jurisdictions have, that girls underperform in math. It is the opposite. There's great concern about our boys. So, for example, Trinidad in the PISA that they did in 2016, imagine 100 and something countries. The largest disparity in mathematics between girls and boys is in a Caribbean country, with the girls performing better. We have disparities, and I don't want to go into the research part of it, but there are concerns about our boys. And one of the things I will say is that mathematics teaching and learning needs to be more active. I said before that a lot of abstraction. So children are sitting in their rows and columns and they're being told. So for example, the teacher puts, they do one problem on the board, all the kids copy the problem, then they give them one to try, the kids do it. But where's the active engagement? Where is the learning by doing? And as, you know, professionals in education, we know we learn by doing primarily. So for the girls, the education system suits them, because girls, they will sit calmly and nice listening to Miss, and they'll take down their notes, and that's what I see. And when I go into the classrooms in Jamaica at both the primary and secondary levels, the boys are being disciplined. The boys are continually being disciplined because they so-called do not behave. So that means they don't sit quietly and nicely. So what is the ACT project doing? How can my contribution is, how can we more actively engage children in learning by doing activities, using the manipulatives, doing activities, using rich tasks. So we introduced that in the workshop. Certain tasks where it is not just very much theoretical. Most teaching in mathematics is the teacher does, I do, then we do some worksheet exercises. And I'm saying to reach our boys, because, you know, for a lot of the boys, what the engagement in the math class is highly boring. They will not sit and watch you. They will not sit and do what we are asking them to do. So it looks like the boys are underperforming, but my question is, are they fully engaged? The second thing I want to say about gender is that there is no significant difference in the performance in terms of boys and girls for high achieving girls and boys. So Al-Bukhadri 2022 looked at CSEC data across the entire Caribbean. And because everybody's on this hullabaloo about boys are underperforming, for high performing kids, boys and girls are performing similarly. In Dominica, recent data analysis, boys and girls are performing similarly, low performing boys and high performing boys. So the question is, and what do we bring to the ACT project? Who are the underperformers? What are the characteristics of the underperformers? And how can we address this? One, as I said to the workshop participants, let's do a better job in just good quality teaching overall. Quality teaching that engages the students, that builds conceptual understanding, that builds pattern finding and generalizing, and allows children to apply whatever mathematics they are doing to the real world settings. 4 approaches, research-based approaches. There are others that you can target specifically groups depending on their needs, but those are 4 that I think to be fundamental across all educational levels. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have, and you've shared some good news on one hand, and I guess that some challenges on the other hand. Nonetheless, this is a model that the Caribbean should be proud of in terms of girls performing at a better rate, and perhaps we need to share with the world.
Definitely.
Yeah, good to know. It's good to know this.
You're absolutely right. And I think I'm fortunate that I'm getting questions about research that I'm actually doing, because I look at inequities and inequalities in education. I look at gender as part of my research, extensive research across the Caribbean, and I look at school location and other disparity factors. So for me, the ACT project is just so right up my alley, because we have to do a better job looking at disparities. Which of our girls, which of our boys are underperforming? Very importantly, why, and how can we intervene?
Thanks. Okay, Lois, we are at the time when we are wrapping up, and just want to give you a moment to, any parting words or comments to us before we close out.
Thank you, Schontal. Thank you for organizing this forum to have a conversation about this very critical topic. As we said earlier, this is a difficult, complex topic, many different perspectives. There's no one size fits all solution. So we would see that a multiplicity of approaches would be in order. I want to say a huge thank you to our country coordinators and our participants from St. Kitts and Nevis, from St. Lucia, and from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It has been an absolute pleasure to work with you, because you are putting in the time, you are putting in the effort. And to the Ministries of Education, VUSSC, and Commonwealth of Learning, thank you so much. Finally, to the attendees, I would imagine that you'd come from a wide cross-section of spheres, some in education, some not. Thank you for attending the presentation and your engagement. And you know what? Like with all difficult, challenging global issues, we have to address them head on. And I think the Caribbean is positioned with this project and with other things that we are doing to contribute to solutions, because finally we can talk about problems all day, every day. But the critical next step is, how do we address it? And it has been an absolute pleasure to just share my own thoughts, my own experiences with you. And my hope is that as you engage, if you're a math person, teacher, educator, stakeholder, you continue doing what you can in your small corner, and the very best to you, and hope, we can communicate and talk more. Thank you so much, Schontal.
You're welcome. Any parting words, Lisa?
Much thanks again, Lois, for a very informative presentation. And I'm still grappling with the idea of numeracy and just the way in which the project, the underperformance, all the areas that you've mentioned, I'm still trying to figure out how math taking away from the abstract, but I'll get there.
All right. And thanks. And just also to the participants, any parting comments, just feel free to just put them in the chat. We will get to them later. Thank you again, attendees to the webinar. We are thankful for your engagement. You stayed with it. You asked questions. You talked about what was happening in your countries and you pushed. And that's what we want. That's what these webinars are supposed to do. They're supposed to challenge your thinking about how what you're hearing can be contextualized to your region, your country, your school. It's also supposed to get you to ask questions about how you can connect to the VUSSC community, the Commonwealth of Learning, and benefit from the resources that are being shared, that are being made available across the Commonwealth, whether small or large state. And even if you're from a country outside of the Commonwealth, you can tap in and connect with us. We have that space for collaboration and networking. So we're really excited, Lois, about the Act in Math project. And indeed, it is functioning like a pilot for the Commonwealth of Learning. We're checking to see how Caribbean teachers act, their approach, their competence, their teaching. I'm giving it new definitions for ACT now. Their approach, their competence, their teaching, right? We want to see how this project is going to help to transform that for better mathematics teaching and by extension student performance. As you said, it can't happen overnight, but we are going to be following up and it's not just going to be a one-off kind of thing. We want to transform mathematics teaching in the Caribbean as the pilot. And then this project can be transplanted into other places in Africa, advancing African teachers, competence and all of those things in math, and then we take it to the Pacific, we take it to Europe and wherever else, Asia, and we take it one Goliath at a time, or one elephant bite at a time. We definitely want to transform and strengthen math teaching. So for those countries that joined us late, I also want to acknowledge you, persons from Kenya and from the UK. Just want to say thanks as well for being here. And as we wrap up, we just want to say a big thank you on behalf of the President of the Commonwealth of Learning, Professor Peter Scott, as well as the Director for Education, Dr. Tony Mays, for the support that they offer to the VUSSC Voices webinar series and how they, support the work that VUSSC is doing generally across the Commonwealth. So just want to say thanks to them. And definitely want to say thank you so much, Lois, for all the hard work that you are doing in this project, for staying true to it and just being so committed to its success, because so many things are riding on it in terms of how, we can scale this project to other regions. So thank you so much. And for the participants in the project and the participants here, the coordinators, the respective ministries, and the government officials in St. Kitts and Nevis and Vincent and the Grenadines and St. Lucia, thank you for making your space a safe space for us to roll out this project and a safe space for the math teachers to develop their competence and confidence in math teaching. We have VUSSC Voices number 5 in May. And the date that we have now is May 21. And in that installment of VUSSC Voices, we're going to be focusing on youth and community development and what youth are doing across the region, in terms of the Commonwealth region. So hope that you will turn out and register, and it's been a pleasure. Usually what we do for every person who has been on this webinar today, and also those who registered and didn't get a chance to turn up, we make the recording available so that you can go back over it in your own time, pick out what you want, and so on. So we hope to have that done to you, sent to you as soon as possible. So as it was Amar who said, act like a child, think like a child. He can't stop thinking about that slogan, and he's going to see how he can expand that slogan. I like the fact that he's thinking as he comes out of this webinar. So each of us, we take something to our own spaces, and we thank you and all the best. Thank you.